The first time Harold saw him, he nearly dropped his cup of tea. It was a quiet Sunday morning in the small seaside town of Brighton. The air smelled of salt and rain, and gulls cried softly in the distance. Harold, 82, sat by the window of the Blueberry Cafe, the same spot where he had his morning tea for the last 12 years. He liked this time of day, before the world woke up, when the sea seemed to whisper secrets only he could hear. But that morning, his world paused. A young man walked past the window, his reflection catching in the glass, tall, with broad shoulders, messy brown hair, and eyes the color of twilight, the kind of blue that only comes before dusk. Harold's heart skipped a beat. Those were his son's eyes. For a moment, his mind played a cruel trick. It told him it was Michael, back from the war, walking toward him just like he used to. But Michael had been gone for 40 years. He blinked. The young man turned the corner and vanished. Harold let out a shaky laugh, trying to calm himself. "You're seeing ghosts again, old man," he muttered. But deep inside, something stirred. He couldn't shake the image, that same smile, that same jawline, that same gentle tilt of the head. The next morning, he went back to the cafe, hoping to see him again, though he told himself he wasn't sure why. Maybe to convince himself that his eyes had deceived him. Maybe because a part of him wanted to believe that time or fate had one last miracle left, and there he was, sitting 2 tables away, sipping coffee, reading a tattered paperback. The young man looked up briefly, smiled politely, then returned to his book. Harold's throat tightened. Even the way he smiled was the same. He stared too long. The young man noticed, and their eyes met. "Morning, sir," the stranger said, voice warm and calm. Harold nodded quickly. "Good morning." After a few moments, he gathered the courage to speak again. "Forgive me for staring, son. You look so much like someone I knew." The young man smiled. "That's all right. People tell me that sometimes." Harold chuckled nervously. "Really, you've got one of those faces? Then, I guess so." The young man closed his book and stood up. "Mind if I join you?" Harold's heart fluttered. "No, not at all. Please, sit." The stranger sat across from him, setting his coffee down gently. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Harold." They shook hands. The old man noticed the faint scar on Daniel's right wrist, in the exact same place his son had one, from when he fell off his bicycle at age 10. For a second, Harold couldn't breathe. "So," Daniel said with a friendly grin, "you come here often?" Harold chuckled. "Every day, it's quieter here than at home. My house, well, it's too full of memories." Daniel tilted his head. "Memories of who?" Harold hesitated. "My son, he died young." "In the war?" Daniel grew quiet. "I'm sorry." Harold nodded, eyes distant. "He was just 22. A good lad, brave, kind. He wanted to make a difference. And then one day, I got the letter. I still remember the seal. Royal Air Force." Daniel leaned forward gently. "That must have been hard." Harold smiled faintly. "It was worse than hard. It was silence, the kind that never ends." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the distant crashing of waves outside. Finally, Daniel said softly, "I lost my father too. I was 7. Harold looked up. "I'm sorry, son. It's all right." I to remember much of him, just the way he used to whistle when he fixed things. I've spent years wondering what kind of man he was. Harold smiled sadly. "Maybe he was just like you." Daniel laughed gently. "You don't even know me." The old man looked at him, really looked, and said quietly, "Maybe I do." Over the next few days, they met again. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Sometimes, Daniel was already at the cafe when Harold arrived. Sometimes, Harold would wait, pretending to read the paper while glancing at the door. They talked about small things, the weather, books, the old radio shows Harold still listened to. Daniel told him about his job at the harbor, fixing boats and helping tourists with their sails. But beneath the small talk, a quiet bond grew. One morning, Harold brought an old photo album with him. The corners were frayed, and the pages smelled faintly of time and dust. He opened it on the table. "This was Michael," he said softly. pointing to a picture of a young man in uniform, grinning at the camera. Daniel leaned closer. His expression changed. "He looks exactly like me." Harold's voice trembled. "You see it too, then?" Daniel nodded, slowly. "It's uncanny." Harold stared at the photo. "Sometimes I dream about him. He's standing by the shore, calling my name. But when I reach him, he fades, and then I wake up alone." Daniel was quiet for a long time. "Maybe he's trying to tell you something." "Tell me what?" Daniel smiled gently. "That he's still with you." Harold looked down, tears welling up. He hadn't cried in years. That afternoon, when Harold returned home, he felt something shift inside him, a warmth he hadn't felt since his wife passed. He made himself a simple dinner, turned on the radio, and smiled when he heard one of Michael's favorite songs. It felt like life was gently returning, like the sea tide, slowly coming back to the shore. He thought of Daniel, how natural it felt to talk to him, how he reminded him not just of his son, but of hope itself. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what fate looks like, a second chance, wrapped in someone else's face." That night, as the rain began to fall, Harold sat near the fireplace, thinking about how life surprises us, even when we think it's over. Sometimes, stories like this remind us that love and connection never truly fade, they just take new forms. If this moment has touched your heart the way Harold's story touched mine, you can support us through the PayPal link in the description. Your kindness helps us keep sharing more stories filled with love, healing, and hope for souls who need them most. The next morning, Harold woke to a knock on the door. When he opened it, Daniel stood there, soaked from the rain, holding a small wooden box. "Thought you might want to see this," Daniel said. Harold stepped aside. "Come in, son. You'll catch your death in this weather." Daniel smiled faintly and entered, setting the box on the table. "I was cleaning out my mother's attic last night," he said. "Found this among her things." He opened the box carefully. Inside was an old photograph, black and white, creased at the edges. Harold froze. It was a picture of himself, young, in uniform, smiling with his arm around a woman he barely remembered from years ago, and in her arms was a baby. Daniel looked at him. "That's my mother," he said quietly. "She used to tell me she met a kind soldier once during the war. She never said much else, only that he gave her this photo before he left." Harold's breath caught. "Your mother's name. What was it?" "Margaret Wells." The room spun for a moment. He remembered her now, a nurse in a field hospital, her smile as gentle as sunlight after rain. They had shared a few months together before the war ended, before life pulled them apart. Harold sank into the chair. "Good Lord. I think I knew her." Daniel frowned, confused. "You knew my mother?" Harold's hands shook as he picked up the photograph again. "That was me, Daniel. That's me in the picture." The silence that followed felt endless. Daniel blinked, his voice barely a whisper. "Then, you're saying?" Harold nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I think I might be your father." The clock ticked loudly in the background, each second stretching into eternity. Daniel sat down across from him, unable to speak. His lips trembled. "All these years," Harold swallowed hard. "All these years, I thought I'd lost my only son. And all this time, there was another, a son I never knew." The fire crackled softly between them. The world outside seemed to fade away. Daniel finally whispered, "Maybe that's why I found you." Harold looked at him, tears running freely now. "Or maybe that's why fate brought you here." The next morning arrived, quiet and golden. The old man, Harold, made his tea and stepped outside. The garden, still damp from last night's drizzle, glistened under the morning sun. And there he was, the young man again, sitting on the same bench, looking lost in thought, holding something small in his hands. Harold's heart softened immediately. "You're early," he said, smiling faintly. The young man looked up. His eyes, those same hazel eyes, caught the sunlight just the way his son S once did. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I had dreams about a man, a soldier, maybe. It felt like he was calling me here." Harold's chest tightened. "Dreams, you say?" "Yes," the boy continued. He kept saying, Don't let him sit alone. I don't know what it means, but when I woke up, I just wanted to come here." The words hit Harold like a wave. For years, every dawn had begun the same way: silence, regret, and the emptiness of loss. But now, for the first time, someone had spoken words that made him feel his son might still be watching over him. Harold gestured toward the porch. "Come, sit with me. There's tea, and maybe a story to tell." They sat for hours. The boy, whose name was Daniel, listened with a quiet, almost reverent attention as Harold spoke. He told Daniel about his son, Peter, how he used to whistle while fixing the old tractor, how he once spent 3 days straight trying to build a wooden birdhouse just to make his mother smile. "He wasn't perfect," Harold said softly, eyes distant. "He was stubborn like me, but his heart was pure gold." Daniel nodded. "He sounds like someone I would have looked up to." Harold smiled faintly. "And what about you, son? What brings you here? You said you were looking for something." Daniel hesitated. "I grew up in foster care. I never knew my parents. I just had this photograph, old and faded, of a soldier holding a baby. But no names. Just a small note on the back that says, 'For Harold.'" The cup nearly slipped from Harold's hand. His breath caught. "What did you just say?" Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out a worn photograph. The edges were curled, but the image was clear. A young soldier in uniform, cradling a baby in his arms. Harold's fingers trembled as he took it. His voice broke. This is Peter, my Peter." He turned the photograph over. There, in faded ink, were 3 simple words: "For Harold, from your boy." Daniel's brows furrowed. "But how?" Harold could barely speak. "Before Peter left for the war, he told me. He and his girlfriend had a child, but I never met her. She wrote once, saying she was moving far away. I didn't know what happened after." They sat in stunned silence. The sound of the wind filled the gap between them, carrying decades of pain, loss, and fate's strange, gentle mercy. Then, finally, Daniel whispered, "So, you mean?" Harold nodded, tears spilling freely. "You're my grandson." The words hung in the air, heavy and light, all at once. Harold's body shook, but his heart felt young again. He reached across the table, his wrinkled hands closing over Daniel's. "I thought I'd lost everything," Harold said, voice trembling. "But life, it always finds a way to bring love back to you, somehow." Daniel didn't speak. He simply leaned forward, embracing the old man. The two clung to each other for a long while, tears mixing with the quiet warmth of the morning. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began to stay longer. He fixed the fence, painted the porch, and mowed the patchy yard. The small town started to notice the old man wasn't alone anymore. There was laughter in the air again, the smell of baked bread wafting from the kitchen, and sometimes even the sound of a guitar being played softly under the stars. At night, Harold would tell Daniel stories about his youth, about Peter, about the days when letters arrived sealed with hope and ended with heartbreak. And Daniel shared his own battles, the loneliness of growing up without family, the nights he prayed to a father he never knew, and how he always felt someone was guiding him, even when the world felt empty. One evening after dinner, Daniel asked, "Do you believe people can meet again, like across time?" Harold smiled faintly. "I do now. I think sometimes love doesn't end. It just waits for us to be ready to recognize it." Days turned into months. The bond between the two grew stronger. Daniel helped Harold digitize old photographs, organize letters, and even started planting a small flower garden, the same kind Peter once made for his mother. One afternoon, Daniel came across an unopened envelope at the bottom of a drawer. The handwriting was unmistakable, Peter's. It was addressed to Harold, dated only 2 weeks before Peter's final mission. Harold's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, the words read, "Dad, if I don't make it home, promise me something. Don't shut the world out. Don't let grief become your home. Because love never dies, it just finds a new way to return." A tear fell on the page. Harold read it again and again, his lips quivering, heart heavy yet light. He handed the letter to Daniel. "Your father left this for me," Harold said quietly, "but maybe it was meant for you too." Daniel smiled through tears. "Then I guess we both got our message." That night, "Grandpa, can I ask something?" "Of course. Why do you live here, alone? You could have moved closer to the city." Harold chuckled. "Because this house, it's where love began. And now, it's where it's come back." He paused, eyes glinting with emotion. "You know, I was ready to leave this world, thinking I'd failed as a father. But life, it gave me one last miracle. You." Daniel reached over and held his hand. "And I'm never letting go again." Months later, Harold's health began to fade. The doctor said it was just age. His heart was slowing down, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He spent his last weeks surrounded by warmth, laughter, and the presence of a grandson who had become his reason to smile again. One morning, Daniel walked into Harold's room. The sunlight streamed in, painting everything gold. Harold lay peacefully, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. In his hand, he clutched a photograph, Peter holding baby Daniel, the one that had started it all. Daniel sank beside the bed, tears falling freely. But this time, the grief felt different, softer, filled with gratitude. He whispered, "You found your way back to us, Grandpa." Just like Dad said. Weeks later, Daniel stood in front of Harold's grave. The inscription read, "Harold Lewis, a father, a grandfather, a soul who found his way home." Daniel placed a small flower on the stone, a white lily, just like the ones they had planted together. He smiled through his tears. "I'll keep the garden blooming, Grandpa, always." As he turned to leave, the wind brushed his face, carrying the faintest whisper, "Don't let him sit alone." Daniel stopped and looked up at the sky, smiling. "I won't, I promise." That night, Daniel returned to the house. It felt quieter without Harold's humming, but somehow it wasn't empty. It was alive, with memory, with love, with presence. He brewed himself tea, sat on the porch, and watched the stars. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel alone. The clock ticked softly, and in the stillness of the night, Daniel felt a calm peace wash over him. He whispered, "Thank you for finding me." If this story touched your heart even a little, dear listener, if it reminded you of someone you loved and lost, or someone you still carry within ID, be so deeply grateful. If you could help support me in creating more stories like this, you can send your love through PayPal. The link is in the description below. Your kindness keeps this channel alive and helps us bring comfort, one story at a time. And remember, love never truly leaves us. It only changes its form. So, until our next story, good night and take care of your heart.